Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Megan McCarthy and today we're doing a deep dive into Cyrano de Bergerac. Cyrano de Bergerac is Edmond Rostand's most famous play. It came out in 1897, mythologizing the actual Civinian di Cyrano de Bergerac. In this deep dive, I'm going to first share the summary of Cyrano de Bergerac. Now this is going to have all the spoilers because it's going to go over literally everything in the Cyrano de Bergerac play that's important. So we're going to start off with that and then I'll go over my thoughts about Cyrano de Bergerac and why I love it so much and what makes it so special. A summary of Cyrano de Bergerac. Before I begin, I'd like to say that I don't speak any French. I studied Spanish in high school, so my pronunciation is going to be a little questionable, but I will do my best to pronounce it as best as I can. Cyrano de Bergerac, Act 1. The year was 1640. The location was the Hôtel de Bourgogne Auditorium, a building that was the Paris residence of the Duke of Burgundy before being partially demolished and converted and transformed into a theater. The play is La Chloris. The audience filters in. They each find a way to amuse themselves before the show begins. Right as the chandeliers are lit for the play, Linieri and Christian de Neuvillette enter the auditorium. Linieri wants to leave to go drinking, but Christian persuades him to stay so that he can learn the name of the woman he's fallen in love with. The lady in question enters her theater box, and Linieri tells Christian that her name is Roxanne, and that she's the cousin of Cyrano. De Guiche had arrived with a group of marquis and other noblemen. He goes to sit on the stage when he calls for Valvert to follow him. Linieri had just told Christian before he left to go drinking that De Guiche wants to arrange a marriage between Valvert and Roxanne, so Christian went to throw his glove in Valvert's face when he catches a pickpocket trying to steal his purse. The pickpocket says he knows a secret about Linieri that he'll share if Christian releases him. Without letting go, Christian forces the secret out of the pickpocket. The pickpocket admits Linieri is going to be attacked by 100 men on his way home. Linieri had offended someone with a song he wrote. The pickpocket then suggests Christian leave and warn Linieri about the plot against him. Christian does just that. The play begins. Montfleury takes the stage. He begins his monologue. But then he is interrupted by a voice. "Haven't I ordered you off the stage for a month, you wretched scoundrel?" Montfleury hesitates, but is encouraged to go on by the marquis on the stage and from the people on the floor. He's interrupted again by the voice. He tries to continue, but the voice, Cyrano, stands on his seat and threatens him. Montfleury asks for protection from the marquis. They say they'll protect him and to go on with his acting. Cyrano says if he continues, he'll attack with his sword. They go back and forth, and the crowd tries to get Cyrano to let the show continue. It is then that Cyrano issues his challenge. "All of you who want to die, hold up your hands." All are silent, so he turns back to Montfleury. "I am going to clap my hands 3 times. By the 3rd clap, you will be gone." Cyrano claps once. Montfleury hesitates. Cyrano claps a 2nd time. Montfleury tries to protest. Cyrano claps a 3rd time, and Montfleury disappears from the stage amongst the audience's boos and hisses. Someone in the audience asks Cyrano why he has it in for Montfleury. Cyrano explains that he's a terrible actor, and that his second reason for hating Montfleury is his secret. Bellerose asks about the money that is to be refunded, and Cyrano tosses a purse on stage. Everyone begins to leave, but stay for the conversation between Cyrano and a meddler. The meddler asks if Cyrano has a patron. Cyrano says he does not. The meddler is incredulous and asks again. Cyrano says no. Cyrano tells the meddler to go, or to explain why he is looking at Cyrano's nose. The meddler confesses he's been careful not to look at it. Cyrano asks if it disgusts the meddler. Then he asks if it's too large. At this, the meddler exclaims that no, it's too small, diminutive even. This angers Cyrano. "My nose is enormous, you snub-nosed, flat-faced wretch. I carry it with pride because a big nose is a sign of affability, kindness, courtesy, wit, generosity, and courage. I have all those qualities, but you can never hope to have any of them, since the ignoble face that my hand is about to meet above your collar has no more glory, nobility, poetry, quaintness, vivacity, or grandeur, no more nose, in short, than the face that my boot is about to meet below your waist. De Guiche says that Cyrano is becoming annoying and asks who would silence him. Valvert tells De Guiche to watch this and approaches Cyrano. You have a nose that... Your nose is, very big. Cyrano asks if that's all. Valvert hesitates. Cyrano cuts Valvert off and explains the many ways Valvert could have insulted his nose if Valvert had any wit. De Guiche tries to lead away the furious Valvert, but Valvert comments that Cyrano doesn't have gloves, ribbons, tassels, or braids. I have a different idea of elegance. I don't dress like a fop, it's true, but my moral grooming is impeccable. The two then duel. Cyrano says he is a poet and will compose an impromptu ballad while he fences with Valvert. When he reaches the end of the poem's refrain, he will draw blood. The two fight as Cyrano performs his poem. At the end of the refrain, Cyrano draws blood from Valvert. The people who came for a play stayed for a duel. Then they all depart. The doorkeep asks if Cyrano will have any dinner. Cyrano says no. Lebret asks him why not, and Cyrano explained that he is broke because the purse he threw on stage contains his month's wages. The refreshment girl offers him food and drink from her cart. Cyrano doesn't refuse because he doesn't want to offend her, but he takes a lonely grape, a glass of water, and half a macaroon. Lebret warns Cyrano that he made a lot of enemies with his time. Cyrano asks how many and who, and is delighted by the answer. Lebret asks Cyrano the real reason he hates Montfleury. Cyrano responds that the actor made amorous eyes at a woman. Lebret intuits that Cyrano is in love and asks who. Cyrano says the most beautiful woman in the world. Lebret guesses that Cyrano means his cousin, Roxane. Cyrano says it's hopeless because of his nose. Lebret says that Cyrano's performance today had to have impressed his cousin, and the refreshment girls wasn't appalled by his appearance. Cyrano comes around to the idea that he might have a chance with Roxane. It's then that Roxane's duenna comes in and says she needs to speak with Cyrano. Roxane would like to meet him tomorrow. Cyrano, with Lebret's help, suggests Ragueneau's shop at 7 a.m. Cyrano is ecstatic that she wants to see him. He claims he needs an entire army to vanquish. At that moment, Linieri runs up and asks if he can sleep under Cyrano's roof that night. Cyrano declares that Linieri will sleep in his own bed, and he leads a troupe of actors and onlookers and Linieri to the port of Nesle, where he will fight. And that is the end of Act 1. Act 2 of Cyrano de Bergerac. It opens up in Ragueneau's shop filled with food. The pastry cooks bring in a variety of food and pastries. One pastry cook brings in a lyre made of pastry dough. Ragueneau gives the pastry cook money and tells him to drink to his health. Then Ragueneau's wife, Lise, enters. She brings out Ragueneau's poems, deconstructed books, and friends' poems to use as paper bags for the business. Two children enter the shop and order 3 pies, asking for them to be wrapped. Behind his wife's back, he gives them 6 pies instead of 3 if they forgo the wrapping. Cyrano then enters. He's an hour early. He asks if he can be alone with the person he's meeting with when they arrive. Ragueneau says his poets will arrive. Cyrano tells him to take them away at his signal. Cyrano then borrows a sheet of paper and a pen from Ragueneau and writes out his feelings for Roxane. It is then that the poets file in singing Ragueneau's praises. They state that they were late because there were 8 bodies at the Port de Nesle. Cyrano denies knowing anything, but thought there were only 7 bodies. Ragueneau recites his poem to the poets, who help themselves to Ragueneau's pastries. Afterwards, Cyrano goes up to Ragueneau and asks if he noticed the poets stuff their face while he reads his poetry. Ragueneau says he does, but it brings him joy to share his poetry, and he feeds his brother poets, who would otherwise grow hungry. Cyrano gives the signal and Ragueneau leaves with his poets. Roxane and her duenna arrive. Roxane thanks Cyrano for humbling that arrogant fop with his sword because De Guiche was trying to impose him upon her as a husband. They reminisce about their childhood, and Roxanne takes Cyrano's hands, where she notices he has cut his hand. She asks how he hurt himself this time. Cyrano responds that he was playing at the Porte de Nesle against not quite 100. Cyrano asks what Roxanne could not say earlier, and she responds that she is in love with someone who doesn't know yet, a poor man who has loved her from a distance. He's proud, noble, young, fearless, handsome. At that, Cyrano realizes that she wasn't referring to him. Cyrano had mentioned that the man was a cadet in Cyrano's company, so Cyrano asks who it is. Christian de Novelette, she replies. He replies that no such person is in his guards. She says that he's new, so new that he started this morning. She continued that she was worried for him, for she had heard rumors that the company was primarily made of Gascons, and they always try to start a duel with non-Gascons. Cyrano admits she has reason to worry, and promises she'll protect her Baron. Roxanne is delighted. She tells Cyrano to tell the Baron to write to her. Then she rushes out. Ragueneau pops his head in and asks if he and his poets can return. Cyrano says yes, and then Cyrano's captain walks in the door. He's heard of Cyrano's exploits, and 30 of his cadets were heading over from the tavern across the street to celebrate with Cyrano. Lebret is in the throng, and he asks about Roxanne. Cyrano tells him to quiet. Many people come up to Cyrano, who is getting increasingly frustrated. De Guiche arrives with a message from Marshal de Gachon. The marshal had just heard of Cyrano's exploits and wanted to express his admiration. The captain tells Cyrano to introduce de Guiche to the company. Cyrano does so with a poem. De Guiche is impressed with Cyrano's poem and asks if he'd like to become his follower. Cyrano states that he prefers to follow no one. De Guiche's uncle, Cardinal Richelieu, was also impressed with Cyrano's combat. De Guiche promised to help get Cyrano's play in front of the cardinal. Cyrano is tempted until De Guiche says the cardinal would rewrite a few lines. Cyrano responds that he couldn't imagine a single comma changed. A cadet enters holding a sword with hats skewered on it and says the men must have run away too fast for their hats to follow. One man says that the man who hired them must be in a rage today. Another man asks if they know who ordered them. De Guiche declares that he did it to punish a drunken rhymester. Cyrano takes the sword of hats and lowers it in a gesture of homage to De Guiche, so all the hats spill to the floor. Cyrano then asks if De Guiche would like to return the hats to his friends. De Guiche gets up to leave, but asks first if Cyrano has read Don Quixote. When Cyrano says he has, De Guiche suggests Cyrano read the chapter on windmills, because when one attacks them, they are often hurled into the mud. Cyrano responds, or up into the stars. De Guiche leaves. Lebret goes up to Cyrano and chastises him for ruining every opportunity that comes his way. Cyrano then states that he'd rather uphold his honor than reach fame and glory by hoping for the generosity of another. In short, I scorn to be like parasitic ivy, even though I'm not an oak. I may not rise very high, but I'll rise alone. Cyrano goes on to say that he enjoys being hated and feared. After a moment of silence, Lebret says, "Proclaim your pride and bitterness loudly to the world, but to me speak softly and tell me simply that she doesn't love you." During the conversation, Christian has entered the room. He mingled with the cadets, but no one interacted with him, so he goes off and sits by himself. A cadet asks if Cyrano will tell them his story now. Cyrano says not yet and goes off to chat quietly with Lebret. The cadet says the lesson would help the timid apprentice Christian. Apprentice, Christian asks. The cadets then warn Christian not to even mention or gesture to one's nose. Christian goes up to the captain and asks what one should do when Southerners become too boastful. "Prove to them that a Northerner can be courageous," he replies. Cyrano returns and everyone gathers around as he begins his story. Christian cuts off one of his descriptions with a mention of the nose. Cyrano asks who the man is and is told he is Baron de Novelette. Cyrano is furious, but regains his composure and continues his story. Christian again interrupts with a nose phrase that could finish Cyrano's sentence. Christian does this repeatedly as Cyrano gets even more and more angry and frustrated. Eventually, Cyrano orders everyone out. They all leave, knowing Christian will be turned into mincemeat. Cyrano turns to Christian and asks him to embrace him, says he's a brave man and that he's Roxane's cousin. Christian asks if Roxane loves him. Cyrano replies, perhaps. Cyrano tells Christian that Roxane expects a letter from him. Christian tells Cyrano he's hopeless in the words of love. I need eloquence and I have none, Christian says. I'll lend you mine, Cyrano replies. Christian is baffled. Cyrano asks if Christian is capable of repeating everything Cyrano tells him every day. Christian starts to protest, but Cyrano promises that Roxane won't be disillusioned. Christian laments that he'll need a letter. Cyrano takes the letter he wrote for Roxane and gives it to Christian, saying it will only need a name and address. Christian is suspicious, but Cyrano eases his fears and accepts the letter, embracing Cyrano. The cadets then return to the room in awe that Christian is fine. One musketeer that had been fawning over Lise asks if they can now mention the nose. He goes up to Cyrano and comments on his nose. Cyrano slaps him and the cadets cheer. And that's the end of Act 2. Cyrano de Bergerac, Act 3. The third act opens with a little square in the Marais quarter of Paris. We are looking at Roxane's house and the wall of the garden overflowing with foliage. Above the door is a window and balcony. There is a bench in front of the threshold. Across the street is a similarly old building. The door's knocker has been silenced with a cloth. The duenna is seated on the bench. The window is open wide onto Roxane's balcony. Besides the duenna stands Ragueneau, who is dressed in a kind of livery. He's finishing a story and wiping his eyes. Ragueneau is telling the duenna about how his wife left him for a musketeer. The duenna then calls up to the window that they're going to be late. She explains to Ragueneau they're going across the street to listen to discourse on the tender passion. From down the street, singing can be heard, along with string instruments. Along comes Cyrano, followed by two musicians. The duenna asks Cyrano where the musicians came from. Cyrano explains he won them in a bet. Roxane comes out and exclaims how wonderful Christian is, saying he might be more clever than Cyrano. Roxane quotes Christian's letters, and Cyrano pretends to be unimpressed. The duenna rushes upstairs to say De Guiche is coming, and the duenna and Roxane tell Cyrano to hide in case De Guiche finds out about Roxane's love of Christian and does something to interfere. De Guiche tells Roxane that he's going off to war and will be taking the cadets with him. He says he's hoping to get his revenge on Cyrano. Roxane, concerned for Christian's safety, suggests a better revenge would be to take away Cyrano's opportunity for a good fight, to leave him at home instead. De Guiche, convinced of Roxane's love for him, agrees to the idea and suggests to stay behind one day to be with her. She says no, go be my hero, calling him by his first name, Antoine. De Guiche leaves, and Roxane tells the duenna not to tell Cyrano what she has done. Roxane, the duenna, and Cyrano then go next door. Roxane asks Cyrano to tell Christian to wait for her if he arrives. She then tells Cyrano she's going to have him improvise and speak to her of love in his magnificent way. She swears Cyrano to secrecy. Christian arrives, and Cyrano suggests they go back to his place to prepare. Christian refuses, saying he's tired of borrowing his letters and speeches. Now that he knows Roxane loves him, he can woo her himself. Roxane then returns. Christian begs Cyrano to stay, but Cyrano departs behind the garden wall. The intellectual women Roxane was with depart. Roxane then asks Christian to sit with her in the garden. Christian tells Roxane he loves her. She asks him to speak of love. He repeats that he loves her. She asks him to expand his theme. He says that he loves her so much. Roxane is disappointed. Christian can't think of anything to say, so he repeats himself. After some back and forth, Roxane storms inside and closes the door in Christian's face. Cyrano returns from behind the garden wall and congratulated Christian's success. Christian begs Cyrano for help. Initially, Cyrano refuses, but then he agrees to help. The musicians return from playing for Montfleury, where Cyrano had sent them, so Cyrano sets them up to watch for anyone coming by. Cyrano hides under the balcony while Christian throws pebbles at Roxane's window to get her to open up. When she does, Christian starts repeating the lines Cyrano tells him. Roxanne likes the words, but asks why he speaks so haltingly. Cyrano grabs Christian and pulls him under the balcony, taking his place to continue wooing Roxanne. Roxanne asks to see him, but he says no, the darkness better suits his purpose. Cyrano continues to woo her honestly, almost slipping up and giving himself away at one point. At the end of his proclamation of love, Roxanne admits that she is in love and that she is his and that she's weeping, drunk with love. Cyrano begins to say he only asks for one thing, and Christian interjects with a kiss. Cyrano disagrees, though. He thinks it's too soon. Then the musicians begin to play, alerting them that someone is coming. It's a Capuchin who's looking for Roxanne. Christian sends him off in the wrong direction. Christian tells Cyrano he wants that kiss, that it's gotta happen someday. Roxanne opens her window again, and Cyrano woos her until she's ready for a kiss. Christian hesitates to climb her balcony, wondering if it's wrong what they're doing, but Cyrano tells him to climb, you fool. Roxanne and Christian then kiss. The musicians start playing again. The Capuchin is back. Cyrano calls up to Roxanne to see if Christian is still there as a warning that someone is coming. The Capuchin is upset that Christian sent him to the wrong direction. He has a letter to be delivered to Roxanne. The letter is from De Guiche. Roxanne reads the letter to herself. De Guiche stayed an extra day to see her and would be coming to see her shortly. Roxanne then tells the Capuchin to listen to her read the letter. She then makes up the letter's contents and says that the cardinal is demanding she secretly marry Christian, and the Capuchin is to perform the ceremony. When the Capuchin becomes suspicious, she adds that the cardinal has ordered her to give 1,000 francs to the monastery. The Capuchin then tells Roxanne to resign herself to her fate. Roxanne tells Cyrano to delay De Guiche until the ceremony is over. Roxanne, Christian, and the Capuchin go inside while Cyrano waits outside. Cyrano comes up with a way to distract De Guiche. He climbs up the balcony and then swings down to the floor in front of De Guiche using a tree branch when he arrives. Cyrano pretends that he has fallen as if from a great height, covering his face with his hat and changing his voice. He tells De Guiche that he has fallen from the moon. De Guiche calls him a madman and tries to push past. Cyrano insists that he fell from the moon and asks what country he landed in. Eventually he concludes he's in Paris. De Guiche tries to push past when Cyrano puts out his leg and claims he was bitten by the Great Bear constellation. Cyrano continues to distract De Guiche. De Guiche pushes past Cyrano and walks to Roxanne's door, but turns around when Cyrano claims he's invented 6 methods for getting to the moon. Cyrano explains all 6 methods, drawing De Guiche away from the door slowly. De Guiche asks which method he chose. Cyrano claimed a 7th method. In the middle of explaining, the 15 minutes are up and Cyrano drops his act and says the wedding is now over. De Guiche is bewildered. Lackeys appear bearing a lighted candelabra. Following the lackeys are Roxanne and Christian, the Capuchin, and Roxanne's duenna, who is in a dressing gown. De Guiche compliments Roxanne's cleverness. Then he tells Roxanne to say goodbye to her husband. He's sending the cadets to war. Roxanne makes Cyrano promise Christian will stay safe and warm at war. Cyrano says he can't promise that. Then she makes him promise that Christian will write every day. That he can promise her, and so he does. And that is the end of Act 3. Cyrano de Bergerac, Act 4. The scene opens up on Carbone de Castelgelou's post in the siege of Arras. In the background is an embankment, and beyond that is a plain covered in siege works. Daybreak is near. The cadets are asleep except for Carbone and Lebret. The two are complaining that there's no food left. They hear shots being fired. Carbone says it's just Cyrano coming back. Cyrano arrives back at the post. Lebret questions the prudence of Cyrano crossing Spanish lines to send Roxanne a letter every night. Cyrano says he saw something that means they'll either eat or die, but he won't say what. Cyrano leaves to go write the next one. The drum beats and the cadets awake, complaining of their hunger. Eventually someone suggests mutiny. Carbone calls to Cyrano for help. Cyrano comes out of his tent with a witty remark for each of the cadets' complaints. One of the cadets asks why Cyrano never complains about his hunger. Cyrano replies, because there's one thing I'm not hungry enough to swallow, my pride. Cyrano asks the cadet to play on his fife Gascon music. The cadet plays while the rest bow their heads, some weeping with homesickness. Carbone worries this will soften them, but Cyrano says it'll take very little to stir the courage in their blood. The drums beat again, and the cadets jump up, reaching for their weapons. De Guiche heads their way. Cyrano tells the cadets not to show De Guiche how miserable they are. The men then bring out dice and cards, and some men start smoking their pipes. De Guiche greets Carbone. Then he greets the grumblers, and goes on to explain that he's heard all about their complaints against him and gives examples. De Guiche suggests he should have their captain punish them, and Carbone says he has only to obey De Guiche's battle orders. De Guiche then tells the cadets he could afford to despise their mockery because his conduct under fire is well known. Just the day before, he had drove back Count de Bucquois. Cyrano mentions that he shouldn't forget his white scarf. De Guiche is pleased Cyrano heard about it. He said he was in danger of being captured or shot when he had the good sense to take off his scarf and drop it to the ground. De Guiche asked Cyrano what he thought of that. Cyrano says Henry IV would have never given up his white plume. De Guiche proclaims that his scheme worked. Cyrano replied that may be true, but he never misses an opportunity to be a target. De Guiche says Cyrano is bragging. Cyrano says to De Guiche to let him borrow his white scarf. De Guiche says now Cyrano is really bragging because the scarf is lost under heavy enemy fire where no man can retrieve it. Cyrano pulls the white scarf from his pocket and throws it to De Guiche, saying, "There it is." De Guiche then thanks Cyrano, saying the cloth will make a signal he's been hesitating to make. De Guiche climbs to the top of the embankment and waves his scarf several times. A man is seen running away. De Guiche explains that he's a Spanish spy who works for him and tells the Spanish whatever he wants them to hear. De Guiche continues by saying that in an effort to get them food, the marshal left with a big army, leaving them vulnerable to attack. Carbone asks if the Spaniards know. De Guiche said they knew, but the spy had warned him and told him he could send the Spanish where he liked, and De Guiche had chosen where the cadets were stationed. De Guiche said it was important to gain time until the marshal returned. Carbone asked how they would do that. De Guiche said they should fight until the last of them was dead. Cyrano asked, "So that's your revenge?" De Guiche admits that if he had liked them, he wouldn't have chosen them, but their bravery suits his need. De Guiche then goes off with Carbone to discuss preparations. Cyrano approaches Christian, who has his arms folded. Christian admits to Cyrano he wishes he could pour his heart out to Roxanne in one last letter. Cyrano says he already thought something like this might happen today, so he already wrote Christian's farewell letter. Christian asks to see. He reads the letter, but stops to ask Cyrano what the stain was. Cyrano admits that it's a tear, and explains the poet is sometimes affected by their work. Christian takes the note back. At that moment, a carriage arrives in the king's service. The carriage door opens, and out steps Roxanne. They ask Roxanne how she got there. She says she followed the wasteland they left behind, and when stopped by Spaniards, she just smiled sweetly and said she was going to her lover, and they let her through. Everyone tells her she needs to leave. Roxanne says there's going to be a battle. Let them kill her with Christian. De Guiche tries to tell Roxanne it's a dangerous post. Cyrano says he would know since he assigned the post. Roxanne insists on staying. One cadet shouts out that they'll defend her. Roxanne asks De Guiche if he's leaving because the fighting may begin. De Guiche says he'll go inspect the cannons and then he'll come back. He implores Roxanne to leave. She says never. De Guiche leaves. The cadets hurry to make themselves more presentable for Roxanne. Cyrano pleads with Roxanne to leave. She says nothing will make her leave. Carbone then introduces the men. Carbone tells Roxanne to open her hand holding her handkerchief. It falls to the ground. All the cadets move to pick it up. Carbone picks it up and says now the company has a flag. The cadet mentions food, and Roxanne says she is hungry too. She asks them to fetch her some. They ask where they could find the food she's looking for. She says it's in her carriage and to look closer at her coachman. It's Ragueneau. Ragueneau starts handing out food. Cyrano asks to speak with Christian privately. Roxanne asks Christian to assist and eventually calls on Cyrano to help as well. Cyrano whispers to Christian that he must speak with him before Christian speaks with Roxanne. Roxanne asks Christian what he'd like to eat. He says he wants nothing. He asks her why she came. She says she'll explain later. For now, her time belongs to these men. De Guiche is seen returning, so they hide all the food and wine. De Guiche asks why they all look so happy and their faces are so red. They make up excuses. De Guiche asks Roxanne what she's decided. She says she will stay. De Guiche then asks for a musket, saying he won't leave a woman in danger. The cadets then agree he's one of them, and they all bring out their food to share. De Guiche refuses to eat their leavings and says he can fight on an empty stomach. The cadets then say he really is one of them, and they all begin to dance. Carbone returns and says he has stationed his pikemen. De Guiche asks Roxanne to go inspect them with him. She goes with him. Cyrano explains to Christian that he's written to Roxanne more often than Christian thinks. Christian asks how often, and Cyrano admits he's been writing to her twice a day, and that he's been crossing enemy lines to do so. Roxanne returns before Christian can finish his questioning of Cyrano. Christian asks Roxanne why she came. She says his letters inspired her. She says his letters made her feel a powerful, sincere love. He asks if she really felt that. She says she did, and apologizes for loving him only because he is handsome. He says her name, dismayed. She says she loves him only for his soul now. Each thing she says brings Christian into further disappointment. Christian says it was better before when she had loved him for his looks. She says she would love him if he became ugly. He asks if she meant it. She says yes. Christian says he must go and speak with someone. He tells her to spend time with the men since they may die today. Christian runs to Cyrano. He tells Cyrano that Roxanne no longer loves him, and it's Cyrano that she loves. Christian wants Cyrano to tell Roxanne everything. Cyrano tells Christian to stop tempting him. Christian says he's tired of being his own rival, and says he wants to be loved for himself or not at all. He then calls Roxanne over and says Cyrano has something important to tell her. Then Christian leaves. Cyrano asks Roxanne if she was telling the truth. Roxanne says yes, but can't bring herself to say the word ugly in front of Cyrano. He says it's okay, it won't hurt him. Shots are heard off stage. Cyrano says to himself that he might actually have a chance. To Roxanne, he begins to speak, but Lebret interrupts and whispers something in Cyrano's ear. Cyrano drops Roxanne's hand with a cry. It's all over now, Cyrano says. Roxanne asks what has happened. The cadets come through with a bundle, trying to hide it from Roxanne. Cyrano stops her from rushing forward. She then asks what Cyrano was going to tell her. He says that he has nothing to say, that Christian's mind was, or is, the greatest. Roxanne starts at were. She screams, runs to the cadets, and pushes them aside. Lebret says it was the first shot fired by the enemy. The battle is beginning. People are called to their places. Roxanne finds a letter to her from Christian. Cyrano tells Roxanne the attack has begun. She asks Christian to stay a moment longer since he was the only other person who knew Christian. She says he was a brilliant poet and a magnificent mind, and Cyrano affirms each statement. She throws herself on Christian's body. Cyrano gets De Guiche to get Roxanne out of there. Cyrano then tells the wounded Carbone not to worry. He has 2 deaths to avenge, Christian's and his happiness. Cyrano rallies the men. The Spanish officer asks, "Who are these men who have such scorn for death?" Cyrano responds, "These are the stout-hearted Gascon cadets of Carbon de Castelgelou. They fight over trifles and shamelessly lie. These are the stout-hearted Gascon," and the rest of his poem is lost in the tumult of battle. That is the end. Cyrano de Bergerac, Act 5. It's 15 years later in the autumn of 1655. The scene opens on the park of the convent occupied by the Ladies of the Cross in Paris. In the middle of the stage is a large tree. Down stage right is a semicircular stone bench amongst some box hedges. Between the bench and the tree is a large embroidery frame and a small chair. Autumn leaves are scattered all over the ground. Sister Martha tells Mother Margaret that Sister Claire looked at herself in the mirror twice to see how her headdress looked. Sister Claire says, yeah, well, Sister Martha took a prune from the tart this morning. Mother Margaret threatens to tell Monsieur Cyrano this evening. The nuns say, no, he'll make fun of us. Sister Claire says Cyrano has been coming every Saturday for the past 10 years, hasn't he? Mother Margaret says longer than that, ever since his cousin came to them 14 years prior. The nuns say he is a good man, but a bad Catholic. They say they'll convert him. Mother Margaret forbids them from doing that very thing, saying he might show up less. Mother Margaret says Cyrano is poor, Lebret told her. Then she herds the nuns inside to give Roxane her privacy as she walks with de Guiche, who has come to visit her. De Guiche is now the Marshal Duke de Gramont. De Guiche asks if Roxane is still in mourning and still faithful to Christian. She replies yes. He asks if she's forgiven him. She says she has since she's been there. De Guiche asks if he was really all that special. She said Christian showed his true nature only to those who knew him well. De Guiche then asks if she still wears his letter over her heart. She says she wears it like a holy relic. He then asks if she loves him even in death, and she says she feels like he's not really dead, that their hearts are together. De Guiche then asks if Cyrano still visits her. She said yes, he comes every week and is very punctual, and he replaces the Gazette for her. Lebret arrives. Roxane asks how Cyrano is doing, and Lebret says poorly. Cyrano is living in isolation and poverty. His writings are constantly making him new enemies. Roxane says that Cyrano's sword brings terror. No one will ever best him. Lebret says he fears loneliness, hunger, or the cold of winter could end his life. De Guiche says Cyrano may not have reached the heights of success, but you shouldn't feel sorry for him. He lives without compromise, free in thought and act. De Guiche goes on to say he'd be honored to shake Cyrano's hand. He then leaves. Roxane accompanies him to the door. Before leaving, De Guiche says he envies Cyrano. He says that when a man becomes successful, even if he's done nothing really wrong, he has all sorts of reasons for feeling disgusted with himself. De Guiche then says he must speak with Lebret. He tells Lebret he heard at a card game that Cyrano might meet with a fatal accident, so to tell him to be careful. A nun then approaches Roxane and tells her Ragueneau is there to see her. Roxane says to bring him in. She then tells Ragueneau to tell Lebret his problems, and she walks out with De Guiche. Ragueneau told Lebret that Cyrano had a piece of firewood dropped on his head from an upstairs window, and that he had a big hole in his head. Ragueneau called a doctor, who said if Cyrano gets up, he could die. Lebret and Ragueneau then hurry off to see Cyrano. Roxane calls after them, but they hurry along. Roxane sits at her embroidery chair, and the nuns bring out a chair for Cyrano. The clock strikes, and at the final strike, Cyrano wasn't there, the way he had been on time for the past 15 years. Roxane assumes the sister at the door must be trying to persuade him to repent his sins. A nun arrives announcing Cyrano's presence. Cyrano is obviously struggling, and he has his hat pulled low over his eyes, but he cheerfully explains to Roxane, who is focused on her embroidery, that he was visited by an old acquaintance from the battlefield, that he told to go away because he had an appointment he couldn't miss, to come back in an hour. Roxane says the acquaintance will have to wait. She intends to keep him until nightfall. He says he might have to leave earlier than that. Roxane asks if he's going to tease Sister Martha today. He compliments the nun's eyes, and the nun gasps when she sees how pale he is. He brushes it off and says he ate meat on Friday. The nun thinks he's hungry and whispers to come to the dining hall later for some soup. Roxane catches their whispering and says the sister is trying to convert him. Roxane then asks Cyrano to begin his Gazette. He gives the Gazette his face twisting in pain the longer he continues, but careful not to let Roxane see. He gets to Saturday and his head falls and his eyes close. After a moment of silence, Roxane turns and exclaims he has fainted. Cyrano opens his eyes again and brushes it off as his old wound from Arras. Cyrano asks if he might read Christian's last letter. She hands him the letter and he begins to read it out loud. Farewell, Roxanne. Death is near. I believe this will be the last day, my beloved. Roxanne remarks how well he reads the letter. He continues reading. She recognizes the voice and realizes it was Cyrano all along. He denies it. Eventually she gets him to confess. She asks why he chose to break his silence today. At that moment, Lebret and Ragueneau come running. They say that he's killed himself. Cyrano then remembers to finish the Gazette by saying, "Today, Saturday the 26th, an hour before dinner time, Monsieur de Bergerac was murdered." Roxanne is shocked. Cyrano asks Ragueneau what he's doing now. Ragueneau responds he's a candle snuffer for Molière, but he's going to quit because Molière stole an entire scene from Cyrano. Cyrano says it's quite all right and asks if it was well received. It was. Roxanne calls out to the sisters. Cyrano says to leave them. He'd be gone by the time she returned. Roxanne says he must live, that she loves him. Cyrano says in fairy tales when the fair maiden says, "I love you," the prince's ugliness melts away, but his remains, so no, he cannot live. Cyrano says he must go now. A moonbeam has come to take him away. Roxanne's weeping brings him back. He asks her not to mourn any less for Christian, but he hopes she'll give double meaning to her veils. Roxanne swears it. Cyrano exclaims, "No, not there in a chair." His friends move in to help him, but he says no, he wants no support from anyone, just the tree. Cyrano then draws his sword. He calls out to his enemies, thrusting at the air. He thrusts his sword at compromise, prejudice, cowardice, and lies. He says they stole from him the laurels of glory, the roses of love, but there's one thing they couldn't take from him. Cyrano collapses into Lebret and Ragueneau's arms. Roxanne kisses Cyrano's forehead and asks, "What is it?" He responds, smiling, "My white plume." And then the curtain falls. And that is the end of Cyrano de Bergerac. There are a few things that I love about Cyrano de Bergerac. The first thing is that Roxanne is not just a pretty face. She's an intellectual, and she makes things happen. She's also brave and willing to do extraordinary things. She's also devoted and uneasily swayed by others. Another thing I love about Another thing I love about Cyrano de Bergerac is that the play is so witty. The original French version is done in verse, and while the English version does not retain the rhyme scheme that Cyrano de Bergerac, the French play, has, it does retain some of that music to the ear sound that makes it so special. Now, writers may appreciate that this play shows you how to use dialogue to tell your story, because this play doesn't have a lot of description to help it along, so the words have to explain what is going on without sounding like it's explaining what's going on. And so it's a good lesson for writers to learn how to use dialogue so effectively. I love all the characters in Cyrano de Bergerac. They are fantastic and well developed, and especially Cyrano, who is this idealistic character who doesn't really change throughout the story, and he retains his ideal self throughout the film or throughout the play, and I appreciate that about Cyrano in that regards. There are a few scenes in Cyrano de Bergerac that make me cry every single time I read them. One of those is when Christian is killed in the siege of Arras as the first battle, the first gunshot of the movie, of the play, And the second time is when Cyrano visits Roxanne at the convent and gives his last speech to her. When he reads the letter, oh, that breaks my heart every time. I just bawl my eyes out. It's such a beautiful scene, and it's such a captivating scene as well, with all the details that Edmond Rostand left throughout the play that kind of draw you into this final speech of Cyrano's. It's beautiful. I love it. One fun fact about this play is that there was a real civilian de Cyrano de Bergerac who was a famous writer and philosopher, and he also was in the siege of Arras, the actual siege of Arras in Spain. And so this story is mythologizing his life and adventures. One fun fact is that the real civilian de Cyrano de Bergerac may have been gay, so that makes this story a whole lot more interesting. I think it would be really interesting to read a version of Cyrano de Bergerac that was queer. I think that would just be fantastic. It would make the story even better. One of the themes of the play is that what matters more than your appearance on the outside is the person you are on the inside and the qualities you possess. And I think that's an important lesson for us to learn today, because we tend to assign so much importance to our appearance, and we try to live up to beauty standards that are set for us by society that don't necessarily make sense and are frankly harmful for us. And it's much better to focus on the qualities, the inside qualities of a person, and for yourself to focus on your, inner qualities, your kindness, your generosity, your, inner qualities, than it is to focus on your appearance. Because your appearance, is fleeting. Beauty is fleeting, but the soul is forever. So, going back to what matters more is your inner qualities than your outer appearance. Roxanne at first, she valued the physical qualities of Christian. And then as she read his letters, she learned to care less about his outward appearance and focus more on his soul is what is important. And his soul is what is beautiful to her. And even though she doesn't realize that it's Cyrano who she's falling in love with, she values something different at the end. She changes as a character throughout this story. Christian, on the other hand, he remains the same. He values outward beauty, and he continues to value outward beauty up until the very end of his life. And so you can say something about his death and his unwillingness to change and focus on inner qualities compared to outer qualities. While Cyrano has focused on inner qualities of a person the whole time, but he still focuses on outer qualities enough that it bothers him when people mention his nose, and it stings a little for him. So one thing about Cyrano de Bergerac is I do feel sorry for Roxanne, who does kind of get the short end of the stick, because she's fallen in love with two men, but she loses them, or, you know, she's fallen in love with the same man twice, and she's lost him twice because she thought, you know, he was Christian, and then when he was Cyrano, she lost him right as she had discovered that he was the one who she really loved, and that just feels particularly cruel, especially because Roxanne is such a fantastic character, but it wouldn't be as beautiful as a play if it didn't end the way it did. So, poor Roxanne. I really hope you take the time to pick up a copy of Cyrano de Bergerac and read it for yourself, because this is just such a beautiful and wonderful and entertaining and comic and tragic and fantastic play. But if not, I suggest you pick up a copy of one of the many versions of the movie. I'll be going over the various versions of Cyrano de Bergerac that I can get my hands on, and comparing them to the original Cyrano de Bergerac. So that should be fun. And maybe it'll give you some ideas of which one to pick up, which copy of Cyrano de Bergerac would be the best for you. So, thank you for watching this video. My name is Megan McCarthy, and I would really appreciate it if you could hit the subscription button, hit the like button, and make sure you hit the bell too, so that you can get notifications of my videos. I plan on posting a new video once a month, and sometimes I may post more than once a month. It just depends. My next video is probably going to be another Cyrano de Bergerac video. And yeah, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!